Hello and welcome to today's SAMHSA webinar on grief, a simultaneously unique yet universal experience in honor of SAMHSA's inaugural observance of National Grief Awareness Week. My name is Jocelyn Stutz-Allen and I am one of your co-hosts during this session. We're so glad you've chosen to spend this time with us as we explore a topic that touches many lives in different ways. Just a few housekeeping items. This is a 90-minute session and the webinar is being recorded. We encourage you to share any comments or questions that you have in the chat. And lastly, we acknowledge grief is an emotional experience and topic. Please step away at any moment that you feel you need to do so and know that your well-being is important to us. Next slide, please. Disclaimer, the views expressed in written webinar materials or publications and or spoken by speakers and or moderator do not necessarily reflect the official policies or views of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, nor does not mention the trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsements by the U.S. government. Next slide, please. This webinar is not meant to be a support group, but is focused on general awareness of the impact of grief and how to promote grieving in a healthy manner. Although we will do our best to approach today's discussion with grace and compassion, the discussion may be difficult for some, especially if you've had a recent loss. Please reach out to 988 if you need to at any time for additional support through text, chat, or call. Next slide, please. And at this time, we'd like to invite you to take a moment to reflect. If you're comfortable, we encourage you to write down the name of someone that you'd like to honor today. In the chat, anyone who has left a mark on your life. This is just a way for us to center ourselves and acknowledge the person or the connection that continues even after loss. And at this time, we'd like to take a moment of silence. Thank you. Please know that their memory is honored today. Next slide. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for today's discussion, Dr. Belina Shaw. Dr. Shaw is the Senior Medical Advisor within Center for Mental Health Services at SAMHSA. She's triple board certified in the area of child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry and addiction medicine, and is recognized as a fellow of both the American Psychiatric Association and American Society of Addiction Medicine. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Yale University, her doctorate of medicine from University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and master's degree of public health from Bloomberg Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, where she was a Bloomberg American Health Initiative Fellow in the addiction and overdose focus area. She did her general adult and child and adolescent psychiatry training at the University of Maryland Sheppard Pratt Residency Training Program. Prior to SAMHSA, she served as the medical director for the Behavioral Health Division of Prince George's County Health Department. And also at SAMHSA, some of her areas of focus include serving as the liaison for the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office, co-leading the Black Youth Suicide Prevention Initiative, directing the Interdepartmental Serious Mental Illness Coordinating Committee, ISMIC, and assisting with center activities concerning the behavioral health impacts of long COVID. Notably, she is the anchor in SAMHSA that has also helped move forward the efforts in bereavement and in grief. So Dr. Shaw, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And I will just say that, first of all, I forgot to tell you to not read all that. But actually the benefit of that was I was able to read the chat and see all the names and just why people are here and just overwhelmed and thankful that so many people would join us to talk about such an important topic in this way. So as she said, Dr. Belina Shaw, that's me. and there's lots of other things, but just like everybody else here, I mean, I put a name in the chat as well. I think we're all here because this is a topic that impacts all of us. And yes, so also from a bit of housekeeping, I'm not exactly sure why we have a little block that decides that it wants to follow us, but we don't have a lot of text-heavy slides, so hopefully it won't get in the way. But you know, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, our mission is to lead the public health and service delivery efforts that promote mental health, prevent substance misuse, and provide treatments and supports to foster recovery while ensuring equitable access and better outcomes. And I just wanted to read this mission because I do believe that this topic that touches so many and is so important, I think is central to so much of this work, whether or not that's on the prevention side or also on the side of an unfortunate outcome that can occur from the death related to a behavioral health condition as well. And so from all of this, from both sides of this perspective, this is important, as well as the multiple other supports and services that I think we could continue to grow in our country, both at the service delivery side and also at the social side and as well. Next slide, please. And so why we are here. So as stated, that this is our official observance of National Grief Awareness Week. We've never done this before. And why now? Is that at the federal government, we have started to do some additional bereavement related work. There has been some in the past, not as well coordinated, as well as really thinking about how do we take some of the expert minds that we were able to convene in June. I'll talk a little bit about that and share that with you guys. So this is really an outgrowth of some additional behind the scenes work that has been going on and some other things that we're working on that have not quite been released as of yet. And also, you know, the public health epidemics and the pandemic have led to a significant number of deaths in this country. And we know that especially at this time, this holiday season, that we want to make sure that we're acknowledging the impact of all of this on our society. And then also this is not necessarily meant to be provider training. This is not necessarily meant to be a specific training for techniques or a support group, but really just thinking about the general raising of awareness and really starting to shift our nation's culture around bereavement and grief. So that is really the core of why we're here today. Next slide, please. And, you know, when I thought about this topic and its importance and its significance, I really thought about a graphic sort of like this, is that the grief specifically it can be very painful, and it often is painful. And the beauty of that pain is that it reminds us of the humanity of us as individuals, right? And this time where so much can be done in AI and you can't even tell if a video or is of a real person or not online, or that the content you've seen is from a real person online, that just knowing that the fact that someone or something, but especially if someone leaves us, that we feel a void, that we feel a loss, is something that is quintessentially a part of life and really reminds us of our humanity. And so although technology can be significant tools, such as, you know, if this is, say, some type of prosthetic device to support someone, for example, it can be a very important tool. We know that it will never reach that same degree of sensation and connectivity to the brain, for example, as, say, a human finger. So I just wanted to just think, as I thought about this and the importance that really came to mind. Next slide. And so we have some very long definitions of bereavement and grief that we have really come up with based on some input from some subject matter experts that I'll talk a little bit about. There are several definitions. But really, when we think about bereavement, it's that period condition after a loss, and it often includes grief, which is that emotional, mental, physical, or other responses to a loss. Grief in itself is a natural reaction to loss, and generally subsides over time for most people. But not always. And so the second webinar will be focusing on that, the webinar on December 6th at the same time, what to do with wounds that don't heal. But we really want to also to focus on this and not say that this is something that is an illness or that's pathological or that it's abnormal, and just and raise the awareness about grief as being part of our society and part of our culture so that we can better support each other, whether that's personally or professionally. Next slide. And so, although this will be focused on losses that are secondary to a loss of life, there are multiple other types of losses that can cause grief as well. And a lot of what will be spoken about, and all of the initiative related work, and as we continue to build out this portfolio of work at SAMHSA around bereavement and grief, it will be relevant, or it could be also useful to talk about the other types of losses, but we will really be focusing on loss of life. Next slide. And similarly, there are also different types of grief. This is a sampling of some, but once again, we will be specifically focused on the grief that relates to the time after a period of loss of life, and especially in this one, not a significant degree of detail about the different types of grief. But there's also grief that, for example, happens before someone passes away, and if there's, let's say, terminally ill, anticipatory grief, and a lot of this work can once again be extrapolated to that too. Next slide. And this is just so important, this topic's so important, because when someone dies, there's such a significant ripple effect, and that one's life is so connected to another, whether or not that's because, by direct knowledge or just the trickle-down impact of their loss. And so, I also think about something like vicarious grief also too. If you just know of someone that's passed away, of someone that's close to you and you're supporting them, that can be heavy as well. So, I just think about this from the direct standpoint of the impacts, as well as the indirect. And I think we'll have a speaker who'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. And just to reiterate that at this level of this webinar, this degree of this that we'll be going into this topic is really a general awareness approach. This is actually adapted by a European model, or the slide is a European model. But just in other countries, there is evidence for really creating a system, an infrastructure, an ecosystem around how to support people with grief. And this work that we're doing here, we really want to kind of model and mimic some of the work that's been done in other high-income countries around creating a network and support for compassion and understanding broadly. Next slide. So this is the beginning. We are really, I think, establishing, especially at SAMHSA, some of our additional roots. We've had a lot of roots growth that's been done in specific areas and specific topics and specific types of work. The branch that does a lot of our disaster-specific work has really been a champion in this area for a long time, and especially around the area of disasters or childhood grief or childhood traumatic grief. And we're just really continuing to grow upon those roots here at SAMHSA. Next slide. But we are still growing, and we really do believe that this is really just a continuation of the work. And we just encourage you to have grace and compassion with us as we do this work. Next slide. So in June, we had an expert panel meeting. And in that expert panel meeting, as I talked about some of these federal efforts, there was a focus on how do we really expand the knowledge of and expand bereavement care for the country. We really looked into great detail regarding a systematic review that was done by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and that was sponsored. They sponsored this event. And the panelists that you will see are some of the panelists from that event. I feel like I was just so humbled by the information that was shared. As you'll mention, as you probably heard in that webinar, I am not a grief expert per se. This is not my area of expertise. But this expert panel, I think, just shared so much. And we will, when I thought about this webinar and how to develop it, I wanted to try to share that experience as much as possible with others. However, this is like writing a term paper and then your computer crashes and then trying to hit the, and then trying to reproduce it. It's not going to be the same the next time. So we just do hope that we can share a little bit of that feeling and experience of being in that room. And we'll have some other of the experts on the second webinar, and also having some other folks help us with other areas of this work in the future too. Next slide. So I will get into the introduction of our panelists. So our panelists, as I said, are some from multiple different backgrounds. We have Heather Hill from Renaissance Funeral Home, a funeral director. Dr. Ottilia Hunter, she is works at the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA here with us. Joyelle Milleron from Evermore. Tara Wright from Sesame Workshop. Brenda Vincina from the Transformation Center, Kiva Centers. And then also all of you are on as well. And so as we were developing this, I knew it was important to really think about how do we integrate all of you. And as we realized that there would be several of you on the call, we thought it might be difficult to do a lot of interaction, but we do have a way to do so. So if you can pull out your phone and jump on that Mentimeter, we have the question that we are asking our panelists to answer for us. And so we will also be hearing from you, and we'll share the results of this. So each panelist, we want you to share for a couple of minutes, who you are, what inspires you to do this work, and what are some common ways that people either express or experience grief. And what are some common ways that people express or experience grief will be what is in the Mentimeter. So I will start with Heather Hill.
Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to lend my voice as a funeral director, knowing the importance of the beginning part of grief, the immediate care that people receive once they've lost someone. So thank you for allowing me to share with you guys today. So with my intro, my name is Heather Hill. First off, I'm a mom of 3 teens, a funeral director, a death cafe moderator, and in 3 days, I will have been a widow for 10 years. So that anniversary is coming up. And then a question you asked was, what inspired us to do this work? You can imagine one of the most common questions I get asked is, why did you want to do this? Who wants to do something like this? You're dealing with death every day. Why would you want to do this? And I didn't know that I wanted to do this. This is a 3rd career for me. I was in the medical field in my 20s, and I remembered thinking back how much I loved the death and dying classes. Another career of mine was traveling, and I used to always go to the cemeteries and look at the stones and wonder what their love was like and what their culture was like in the area that I was in. So that kind of piqued my curiosity for how different cultures and different communities process grief and ritualize their loved ones. And then when this opportunity came up in my 40s, I decided, yeah, this is how I want to close out my career life. But I also think back, remembering, growing up at your grandmother's house or my mom's watching Phil Donahue, and I would always climb up and watch it with her. And I would see these stories of people that had gone through horrible tragedy or have had horrible loss. And that loss flickered something in them that made them want to turn their life around. And now they're doing amazing things. And that stuck with me for my entire life. I always wondered how somebody could make that change in their life and ignite that flicker without having to go through something very traumatic. So I think that's what made me want to work with people that were going through hard things, so that I can see this as an opportunity to embrace beauty through the pain, because there can be beauty through the pain. And the work that I do, I would explain it to be that I'm meeting with people at the threshold of their grief. It's that transitional space where the known meets the unknown. The path ahead feels uncertain. And it is a true honor to be able to sit with people at that time of their grief in the very beginning, where somebody has a stranger to share with because they may be protecting their loved ones. So to see their vulnerability and to be able to hold their hand in that moment is a true honor for me. And so that is how I answer why I do the work that I do. And again, thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Dr. Hunter, Dr. Otelia Hunter.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Hunter, and I'm also clergy. I pastor a church. And part of what you do as a pastor is you, very much like Heather, you walk with people through things like this. Getting into clinical work was a second career for me because it just kind of lined up with being clergy. But part of a lot of the work that you do as a clergy is you stand with people during the most difficult times of their lives. And whether it's anticipatory grief, they know that they're getting ready to experience the loss of a parent or a grandparent, to actually helping and assisting them through the funeral services and, immediately after.
You muted yourself by accident or something.
Sorry about that. Being able to stand with people, as they go through this grief at the beginning. But I always saw it as an honor to sit with them. When you have members who have been with you for a long time, or they're family members, or you get that phone call and people just kind of don't know what to do. I always see it as an honor to be with people at the end of their life, and to see and hear the stories from the family members. And so for me, this was really important work. When it came down to clinical work, I actually did my dissertation in this topic because it was that important to me. So it's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Joyelle.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as well. This is really a pretty incredible day for me personally. I came to this work after the death of my daughter 14 years ago. It was obviously a very emotional experience at the time, but I began to realize that there were all these systems around our family that were beginning to fail. Myself, actually my daughter while she was still alive and dying, and then in the aftermath for our family. And so I went back to work and I did some public policy work for a couple of years, but I kept waking up most mornings to Trayvon Martin, Hydea Pendleton, Chicago homicide, Sandy Hook, Jasper tornadoes, and so forth. And I just felt like people needed more than what was currently being offered. And I thought there was a more systematic approach to grief and bereavement for the United States. And I couldn't be more delighted because, there's been a lot of late nights and turmoil to even get to this point that SAMHSA would ever have a webinar on grief and bereavement, let alone a webpage and all the other resources and the attention that your other federal colleagues, Congress, the White House, and so forth. It's really pretty incredible because I think we can do a lot better for the country. And I'm just so honored to be here and be in community with all of the names and all of the people who have joined us today. it is incredibly meaningful to me. So thank you. And I send my love to all of you.
Thank you, Joelle. And Jocelyn said that I was the anchor, but this can't go on without the, you can't move on forward without the boat and the rudder and the motor, right? And so all of us together collectively, I believe, are really the motor in keeping us afloat and in doing this work. Tara?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Tara Wright. I'm with Sesame Workshop, which is the nonprofit global organization behind Sesame Street. So the characters you all hopefully know and love. I'm so delighted to be a part of this work and to create resources for children and families who are experiencing grief and bereavement. And obviously, this is personal to all of us in some way. So I have my own stories of loss and grief. And I think my biggest takeaway in this work is that it's relational, just as you said, Belina and Heather. We grieve together, and we as families, especially families with very young children, need support in how to explain death and how to walk through grief together as children grow and develop and as families really grow and change after the loss of a loved one. So that's what I'm here to speak about, and really just so thankful to all of you in the chat. I'm seeing so many who work with families in a variety of ways, and obviously we need you, and families all over the country really need you. So very, very much appreciative of this opportunity to speak about resources to support you as well. Thank you.
And finally, Brenda.
Hi there, I am Brenda Vizina. I am the CEO and director of the Kiva Centers, which is a space for people with lived experience of all types to get together, to be together and support one another. And we started way back doing death cafes back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, meeting with people from all different cultures, talking about grief, something that we all had in common. We all have lived experience in that way. So, but maybe not the same lived experience. And then we try to really talk about how much culture impacts that. I'm a death doula, and a lot of people think about doulas as coming into life. And I'm really one of those people that comes in and helps hospice to help you come out of that life in the way you might want to do that culturally. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that later on, but we all have it in common. And how do we help each other get through, and not just get through, but expand on what the grief really is, or how it impacts our daily lives, and what we can do to make our daily lives better for ourselves and each other. Thank you.
So thank you guys so much. I think that this panel is just humbling from your experience, both personally and professionally, and the breadth. And we could have so many more to join us to really round out this work, because as Joelle said, there are so many systems and supports that are and could continue to expand in their involvement. And if Olivia, we could bring up the Mentimeter and just see what our results were from our participants about how do people experience grief. It's and the participants can, and our panelists can feel free to jump in as well. And I'm sorry about this box. It just decided to show its little head. What's very interesting is just that crying and anger are so important and impactful. And I see that some people put in a couple, but I think that isolation is also something that we want to talk about, because it is natural and normal for people to want to and need to have their own time together. But just like on this webinar, I think it's also important for us as humans in society to also find ways, in appropriate ways and in ways that are welcome to also connect. But yes, just seeing denial, controlling everything in your life, insomnia. Yeah, these are just such impactful responses. And then also avoidance. So I just want to, and the major reason that we wanted to put this up here was also to remind everyone that grief looks different for everyone. So although there are a lot of similarities in responses, and when you think about, for example, anger looks different in everyone. And so we just want to also remind people that especially during this season, that can bring up waves of grief or reminders about grief, that there isn't a right way, there isn't a one way, and that out of these 200 plus responses, there are just so many more, I think, as well, that ways that people experience grief is too. So this presentation, thanks Olivia, you can go back to the slides. This presentation today is really going to be one big panel discussion, and just talking through what some of these panelists, what their perspective is and what they do for this work. So when we go through this is not a PowerPoint, this is not a formal presentation, this is really just a discussion from all of our places to yours. So I'm going to next jump in to introducing Tara. Well, Tara had already introduced herself, so here we go. Go right ahead, Tara.
Oh, sure. So hi, everybody. Again, I'm Tara Wright. I'm a senior manager of content design on our U.S. education programs team at Sesame Workshop, and it's my honor to get to create content for children and families and the providers who really support their well-being in a variety of capacities, whether that's early educators, physicians, pediatricians, social workers. I know there's some social workers on the call today. If you work with young children and families, we probably have resources for you on lots of tough topics. So including things like grief. We also have resources for divorce or incarceration of a loved one, traumatic experiences in general. There's a whole slew of resources that I get to develop with a wonderful team over at Sesame, and those are all available for free in English and Spanish to you at sesame.org. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So Tara, tell me, why is this such an important topic for children, for kids?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about death and grief, particularly with young children and with families of young children, because children really experience grief differently than grown-ups. And I think when grown-ups are going through their own grief experience, they might kind of project or want their children to respond in a certain way or to have an understanding that they're just not ready for. So I think it's really important to understand that children experience and understand death differently than grown-ups, and that they really grow in their understanding of what death means and how it changes their lives. And so understanding those nuances, especially for the grown-ups in kids' lives, can help them respond in a more meaningful way.
And as far as these products, I mean, how are they developed? What is the process to get these out to the community?
Sure. So with every initiative that we put forth from Sesame Workshop, we start with lots of research. So in this particular instance, we did focus groups with both parents and caregivers, and also providers working in the grief space. And we got to see, what their perceptions of grief were, what the issues were, what the challenges were, what resources they really needed. And I should mention that this latest iteration and launch of resources was an expansion of resources that we created, I think it was almost 15 years ago, with work that actually originated for our military community who, at that time were dealing with lots of homecomings, lots of deployments and things like that, and of course, lots of loss. And so we developed some resources for our military community that were very quickly being used in the civilian population, because this continues to be one of our most visited topic pages on Sesame. It is a topic that's just so important and so universal. So we created those resources, and initially we were talking about, what is death? How do you talk about death? How do you define death to a young child? How do you say that a person died? And one thing that we learned was that we need to be really concrete with children. We need to say that the person died. It can be confusing for really little ones to say they passed on or they moved on. They might try to look for them. They might say, why aren't they here? Are they coming back? So being really clear in our definitions, and being really clear, as difficult as that might be for the grown-up to say that out loud, it's really important for young children to just be very clear in their understanding. And so we started with that, sort of how to talk about death and how to remember and honor someone who died. And this recent outgrowth of resources is really acknowledging that grief is enduring, and especially for young children, it changes. Because their understanding of death changes as they grow older. They might have more nuanced questions. They might be more interested as they get older about how the person died or why the person died. And they might also just have experiences of grieving and re-grieving. So we wanted to create resources for families as they continue to grow and develop, to really meet them at the milestones, and offer support and offer ideas and strategies for how to express those big feelings and express and cope with those big feelings as they age, and as a parent's or a caregiver's experience of grief changes. And kind of, how do you parent through the grief that you're experiencing? How do you make time for yourself? How do you recruit help and tap into your network of community and strength? And how do you tap into your culture? Culture is a big part of the resources that we developed in this round as well. And how do you leverage everything that's around you to get you through this really hard time? And then how do you acknowledge that grief might be a part of your family's story for a very long time, and that it can make you more resilient as a family, and can be something to celebrate about your story. I think I didn't answer your question, but we did research, we did focus groups, and we do a lot of formative testing. So testing them with families, with providers, to make sure that the resources that we're creating are really useful and practical and helpful, and that families can revisit again and again to find the support they need when they need it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you have a guest that's going to join us as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's not Elmo. Spoiler. I'm so sorry. But I do want to play a video. So I want to introduce the main character of our grief initiative, who is Jessie. So Elmo's cousin Jessie lost her dad. Her dad died, and this was obviously several years ago. So I love what we are able to do with our characters, is really give them a story and build out their experience and kind of let you be a part of that. So no matter where a family is, perhaps a loved one just died, you can kind of go into Jessie's earlier story and see how Elmo and Elmo's dad Louie kind of help them as a family, and how they talk about Jessie's dad, who is Elmo's uncle. Do we have the family line here? So Jessie's dad is Elmo's uncle. So and see how they, really relate to one another. And so in these new resources that you're seeing here, we really highlight Jessie and her mom, Jill, and their relationship, and how the changes brought around by grief affect the two of them differently. And I do want to just point out that you can use this QR code to see all of these resources. Again, they're free and available in English and Spanish, like completely versioned in Spanish. It's not just it's like its own thing. So it's going to be a really good experience if that is your first language as well, or if the families you're working with. And we have developed resources in a variety of multimedia here. So we have a storybook. We've got a digital interactive game where you can use clay to express your feelings. And you can, of course, take that off screen and kind of use that same activity with young children. We've got lots of coloring pages and printables. We have an educator guide. So if you're in the classroom or in a group setting with young children, this Growing as We Grieve printable guide has some really simple ideas that you can use for how to support young ones in your classroom and how to develop a sense of empathy for those who might not have experienced the death of someone close to them. And then there's this digital interactive that says Discovering Ways to Grow as We Grieve. This is actually, I'm gonna toot my own horn here. We have won a Webby and an Anthem Award for this resource. It's really, really meaningful, and it was so humbling to work on because it features experts in the field and families. And they were so generous with us in sharing their experiences and sharing what they really went through and what really helped them in the moment and as their kids have grown. So it's really beautiful to hear from people who are doing this work day in and day out at grief camps and also from the families themselves, because it just shines a light that there's so much hope and there's so much beauty. I think Heather mentioned that there's beauty in the pain as well. So I definitely want to encourage you to check out all of these resources. And I do think we can play a video. Yes? Okay, so this video that we're going to play is really about re-grieving.
The leaves are falling. Did you see the leaves fall? Aren't they pretty? The colors? Mom, the leaves.
What?
Do you like them?
Oh, yeah, Jessie, the leaves are beautiful. I was just, I was just thinking about your dad, and I'm feeling a little sad.
Well, I don't want you to feel sad, Mom.
Oh, Jessie, I know you don't. But you know, sometimes these feelings, they just come up. And when the leaves start to change colors like this, well, I start to think about your dad.
Yeah. I miss him.
Oh, I miss him too. Now, you know, your dad and I would sit right here on this very bench, and we'd hold hands and we'd watch the colorful leaves twirl in the cool fall air on their way down to the ground.
Well, Mom, we don't have to look at the leaves if they make you feel sad.
Oh, Jessie, that is so kind of you. But you know, it is okay to feel sad sometimes. You know, ever since your dad died, we have felt a lot of big feelings, and they are all okay.
Yeah. I remember feeling happy.
Yeah?
And then kind of sad when I saw someone playing with a kite, like the one Dad and I used to fly together.
Oh, yeah, you know, I remember that kite. It was, let's see, it was blue and yellow and red. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, you two had so much fun making it fly.
Yeah.
You know, your daddy loved us a lot.
Yeah, he sure did. Mom? I know something else he loves.
Oh, what's that?
Drinking hot apple cider on a fall day like today.
Oh, you're right about that, Jessie. You know, that would be a special treat. Why don't we go have some right now, huh?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like that a lot.
Yeah, let's go. Come on, honey.
Okay.
Thank you. And I just, from Jessie and just that video, there's just a lot of take-home messages for me, and including all of what you just said. As a child psychiatrist, I know that children, they don't understand the finality of death for, many, many years, some say around the age of 8. And so just knowing how to just concretely say that someone has died when it may be very difficult, as well as how to continue to encourage that conversation, honor the memory of the person who has died. And also just what you said about getting that help, whether or not that's that help for yourself through the grieving, help in raising the child, and just that day-to-day routine, when it may be really hard just to go through that oneself. And then to add on the caregiving responsibilities can be a lot. So whether or not that's help with those tangible, and also help with sharing for the child, as well as making sure that they are getting help, the parents getting help in processing and working through and learning to live with that loss on their own as well, so that they can be there as for their child, or whether or not that's a teacher or someone else. So thank you so much for this. I think you have an event tomorrow as well.
Yeah, the timing of this webinar was fantastic. If you are interested at all in these resources, we are going to be taking a deeper dive into them. And then we're also bringing on a handful of other experts in the grief space. So Bree, I'll just mention Bree Overton. She's from Experience Camps, and she's actually featured in the digital interactive that we've created. She's going to be sharing some strategies that they use at grief camps and how they've used the resources. Gina Sampson is going to be speaking again, really practical use case of how, if you're working with families, like really how to use these resources. And Mickey and Jeffrey are going to be giving us some stats. They have a lot of data. It's really interesting. It's obviously difficult to hear, but they're going to give us a really wonderful overview of how families are being affected by death and grief, and what it really looks like, and leading causes of death and things like that. So it's going to be really fascinating. It's short and sweet, but lots of really good information. And I really hope you can join us. That's tomorrow. It's tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much as well. Thank you for being here and sharing this work and sharing the video, Jesse. Next slide. And you have, of course, the best headshot. Joyelle, it's going to be hard to follow that. I'm sorry, but Joyelle, the founder and executive director of Evermore, would love to hear a little bit from you. So some say that grief is a public health problem, and I know that you've recently done some writing to that effect, and Harvard has picked this up. Can you tell us a little bit about why and what are some potential interventions?
Sure. So grief, I would say, is not simply about, and bereavement is not simply about people being sad. It effectively is a gateway event into vulnerability and people adapting or finding modalities to cope in the aftermath that might not serve them in the long run well. I saw a lot of this when I was talking to families years ago after I quit my job, that, people were dropping out of school, drinking, using drugs or alcohol, incarceration, and all of these other ways in which they were trying to digest the experiences that they just had. So from a preventive side, so I think there's certainly a public health case to this, and I think Congress and the White House has agreed with that, obviously. From a preventive side, there are ways during those, if you will, gateway events, whether that's a diagnosis, whether that's a death event itself, for the systems around the individual who have died and the families who are now experiencing bereavement to be reoriented in order to help the grieving and newly bereaved families cope in the aftermath. Right now, many of our systems, and for those of you today, I know many of you are working on the front lines with families, and for those of you who are part of systems, whether that's within churches, within schools, within employers, or even death scene investigations themselves, there are ways to reorient how we respond to a bereaved individual in order to soften the landing. And going back to your photo early on, Dr. Shaw, about the human touch versus sort of more of a robotic touch, I think people, they could put down the phones and they could put down sort of, a text, let's say, and say, I'm thinking about you, but actually showing up to the extent that you can for the people in your life with a phone call or going to their house, and really being that warm touch. Those are the types of things that tend to be really helpful for people beyond the systems change.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. When you talk about these systems changes, what are some examples of the systems-based change orientation changes?
Sure. I mean, there's lots of things we can do. I want to be really careful not to get into some of the current practices that are promoted today, either by federal agencies or in localities, because some of that can be difficult to hear. And so let's just take something just as easy as bereavement leave. And that's one that's popular with a lot of people. There's a lot of other ways to respond to families in a compassionate and dignified way. But bereavement leave for most of the population in the United States is not available. Even right now, we're working on trying to renew bereavement leave for the U.S. Armed Forces. So we were able to help facilitate bereavement leave, 2 weeks of leave for the death of a child and a spouse. That expires in March of next year, and we're working to try to renew that. We're also working with various members of Congress right now on what bereavement leave could look like for the nation, and that could be a major step forward. I'm happy to say, I guess, to the extent in death-scene investigations or in hospital settings where people are really tender and vulnerable, to really reflect how do those systems attend to those folks in those times. Right now, I would submit that, and I think many people who know me know that I feel this way, resilience, I think we're beyond that. When people are tender and vulnerable, we need to stop asking them to be resilient, because right now we're asking people to bare knuckle their way through grief. And the reasons we see adoptions of alcohol and substance misuse and incarceration and job loss and dropping out of school or teen pregnancy is because the systems we've designed are harsh and are not compassionate for individuals. So there are resources like what Sesame is building that are a wonderful first step in making progress and advancing sort of the social transformation that the United States requires. And thank you so much for SAMHSA even being in the lead. There's still so much work to do. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here on sort of the nuances of that, but I'm really delighted that that we're having this webinar today, and that you're committed, as you said, you're rooted and you're growing, and this is sort of the first step in that process.
No, thank you. And I definitely agree that this is a process not just for SAMHSA, but I think for the nation. It was what you said there about the bereavement leave is just so important. Just an assumption that people have leave, or that they can go with leave without pay if they don't have it, or that there's just so many assumptions, and that period around a loss is so important. We talk about making the space, but if you don't have the time to make the space, then how do you make the space?
And if I could just add just briefly that it's not just that people are sad. There's financial vulnerability as a result of losing someone. And there are lots of things that people have to organize in order to maintain financial solvency. And so we really need to be doing better. And I think we can.
Is there anything else, any one or two, just on your wish list of different things that could happen to help prevent this from worsening?
I think a coordinated United States government approach to this across multiple agencies, not just SAMHSA or even HHS, but DOD and DOJ. This is an issue that touches all of us. And it is a moment in time where we can reorient and really show up for our neighbors in a way that right now, we've just gone through a really divisive time. And I think that this is a unifying issue where we can begin to reweave the social fabric of the country. Some people might say that's Pollyanna, but I believe it. And I'm committed to carrying forth this work for everyone.
I agree with you. I do think that this is something that is universally unifying. It affects everyone differently, but it does affect all of us. And I'm just thankful to you and the rest of the panelists for your perspective and your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, we've heard a little bit here about this child and youth perspective. We also heard about thinking about prevention, not just from a developmental lens, but hearing about prevention and support for people who are grieving from a systems-based approach. I am a systems-based person, and I don't think that we can do anything without thinking about concerns or issues without everything that touches that concern or issue. And then next, I want to bring up Brenda. And Brenda has a unique perspective, not only from as a person. You mentioned the death doula in your introduction, as a person that does peer support, and also a person who is very focused on the cultural elements of this experience. As in the title, this is universal, but it's unique to everyone, and it's unique also often in that cultural lens. I love that Sesame Street work is not just translated, but made sure that it was appropriate as well. So Brenda, can you tell me, tell me about just really about grief peer support and being a death doula, and what do these, just tell me, expand on this for the listeners.
Well, it starts with understanding. So lived experience has to start, peer support has to start with having lived through it. So firsthand, not secondhand or thirdhand, although that comes with family support, and that's great. But if you're a person who has grown up in situations where there's poverty, like reservations or pueblos or other impoverished neighborhoods throughout the country, and have been exposed to trauma after trauma of death or dying. So back in the 70s, in some areas of New Orleans, some areas of New Mexico, some areas of the Springfield, Massachusetts, there was a lot of gun violence, a lot of people dying, a lot of gang violence still happening, but in different way back then, in terms of communities having to go on and then keep going on and then soldier on, as Joel said, just move forward. Yeah, that happened, and that's our family, and we have to stay strong and just keep going. And so I experienced a lot of that. One of my best friends was just pushed off of a dump truck during an argument, and he died, and he was 17, and I needed to just go to school the next day. And then came along the AIDS crisis. And then a lot of people impoverished again, were hiding from something, feeling something. I'm not saying all substance use is to cover pain, but a lot of it is. And, and then, a lot of people got AIDS and they died, and you didn't talk about them anymore because that was such a stigmatized disease. So talk about reliving something over and over and over again. And so peer support groups were popping up everywhere during the AIDS epidemic, because people needed someone to talk to, and they were dying at the same time. So there were families that were experiencing, maybe knowing about the AIDS death. And then there were people with AIDS that didn't want to tell their families, that needed someone to talk to. So all kinds of AIDS projects, Worcester set up. I went through a lot of AIDS projects in New York City and in New Orleans and New Mexico. We lost a lot of people during that period of time. And during that period of time, it seemed like we needed to talk with people about how they wanted to die. Do you not want to take this medication anymore? AZT didn't work for everybody. So that's how that began. How do you want to die? What is it, are you ready to give up on this medicine? And a lot of people did say, yes, I don't want to feel like this. This feels terrible. This doesn't feel like living. And I'd rather see my family without all of the lab coats on. Is there a way we can do that where I can touch another person? Because, that was universal precautions at its best, AIDS. So, that dying process was very different. Now we know AIDS isn't a death sentence anymore. We know that. Thank goodness that's true. Thank you. Thank anybody who had anything to do with that. But I did lose my brother from AIDS in 1998. from being, you know, in a traumatic neighborhood, an oppressed neighborhood, and from having an oppressed life. So I speak from that area, and I believe all peer support services speak from the heart, speak from, I know what that feels like, and it's a place of vulnerability that you might not want to tell anybody about, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't come out and become death doulas or people that are peer support workers. I think it's a very vulnerable job, and it's a really hard job. And it's a job that people can sometimes look down on and say, oh yeah, well, those people that, you know, those people, but it's not. It's really an amazing experience to talk with somebody who's gone through it and or something very similar. It's never the same, and it's never linear. Just like in all cultures, it's not the same and it's not linear. So, you know, in native cultures, and not all native cultures, but I'll speak for what I know, you know, in the Pueblo of San Felipe in New Mexico, you know, that is a gift. Dying is gift, and we give the body back to the earth, and there's permits for that, and there's, you know, things of that nature, things that you give to Mother Earth to take, and then there's time, you know, spent together. We don't go to school or work or even care about bereavement, time, or loss. This is what the Spirit said to do, and so the Spirit transcends the government. And then in other places, the Spirit, you know, there isn't a belief of that. In other places, you know, that you want to maybe do your soul work, but you can't afford it. You might get 3 days off. You know, I don't know if anybody here can relate to that, but sometimes we get 3 days off and then we can't afford that. We have to take mental health, family medical leave. So, oh, there she goes. You couldn't hire her. She couldn't handle a regular death. The judgment is intense around grief. So then, you know, why can't you put up those posters yourself? Why do you need help making posters of your mom or your dad? I did it 3 days. I did it by myself, and I whipped everything to shape. So you'll find those soldiers that walk around that have that to brag about for their own pain. So everybody treats their pain differently. And it is definitely not linear. And, you know, I can still see myself in 1965, you know, when learning about Vietnam veterans coming back and some not coming back to my neighborhood, thinking about Curtis Carter, who left us through that garbage truck. I'm 61 years old now, and I was a child then. And those things you relive, and you have that to build on with peer support, I think, in all cultures. And not to take peer support really does go into the situation and not judge it and not assume to know anything about another culture. We wouldn't assume to come over to your house and know something. But as a death doula, I might assume you might want me there, and I'll ask a couple of questions. I'm working with someone right now who is a person that agnostic, doesn't want anything, but asked for a doula. And it was really interesting. Like, what do you think I can do for you? And he said, I think you can have me have a better death. And so, okay, so what does that better death mean for you? Well, I can't see anymore, so maybe you could read to me. So that's what happened. So you just never know what you're going to get in terms of that. Hospice care is wonderful. And sometimes it's only an hour a day. Depends on where your loved one is at. So you could ask for a death doula. In that case, that could spend a lot more time. And it isn't covered under insurance a lot of times. Sometimes it's not even, sometimes it's a volunteer, especially in native cultures. It's usually one of us volunteers. So there's classes to be a death doula. There's certified death doulas. You can be a death doula on your own if you want. It's something that has, you know, comes from your heart. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I did.
No, you did. And you said so much there. And I saw the hearts, especially coming out around those areas around judgment and just the assumption that just because I did or someone else did, that that's the way that you should. And I just want to reiterate that no, it's not just that loss is unique and universal, but that there needs to be that time and space, and that there needs to be that respect for how everyone else grieves, and it's not necessarily a sign of strength. And you know, in some ways, it can be a sign of it can actually lead to weakness in the future if you don't take that time and space. And just because you're sort of, raising that as some sort of, of challenge that you've overcome. And then also the stigma of different types of death, that everybody has, just because people die in different ways, that the way that they might have died could be a way that is stigmatized. HIV and AIDS, less stigma now, but stigma in the past. Death from substance use or drug-related overdoses also have, such stigma that you don't want to share, or even suicide, for example. And so these are just other examples of how this makes it so much more challenging when you're supporting someone. And also just what you were saying about having a good death, like having a peaceful death, and dying as well as you can. And I think that Heather will get into that, and having that, not everyone prepares, and it can make it more challenging. I don't think there's such a thing as a great death or a good death per se, but just a way that someone leaves this place with peace is really just most important. And thank you so much for what you've said and shared about great support and grief peer support, being a death doula, as well as the cultural elements of grief as well, and how you used your example there to show that it really is not just always an individualized experience. Well, I am going to move on to Heather Hill. When I thought about this here, we talk about death in a way that is just happens, right? But you see this every day, and everyone you see has experienced this in their lives. And as a child psychiatrist, I think about children, right? And who knows the most about childhood development are the people who see the most children and the breadth of children, not just children that are sick or that are not doing well behaviorally. They see their teachers, right? And so, as your role as a licensed funeral director, really, and we see people who've experienced losses in different ways and times, when you hear about this workshop, what does come to mind? That's the title, because I think this title probably means something different to you because you just see the breadth of people every day.
Yes. Just the verbiage itself, a simultaneously unique yet universal experience. I mean, that pretty much sums it up. And while we all will eventually experience grief in our life, we all handle it very different. There is no one size fits all. Nobody had the relationship with their loved one like you had with your person that died. So it's very unique. And yet it brings us all together as well. Coming back around to using Joy Al's way of saying the Pollyanna about things, I'm going to use your word as well, because I've used that for myself. Having had my loss, and I think that gives me the armor to sit with these families at the most difficult day of their life. And I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't know that I'm sitting here almost 10 years later, and I'm functioning. We'll never, grief is never something that is healed or that you get over, but I can function. And I know that when I'm sitting with those people, that they will eventually function again in time. Time doesn't heal grief, but it definitely helps us get used to it and move on. And with that, I think I'm able to do what I do because I know they're going to be eventually going to be okay. They're going to be able to look at those photos again and hear that song, and it's going to feel different to them. And being with somebody at the day of or the day after, there's a wide array of folks that I see. I see a lot of people that are in I call it the business mode, where they're like, what do I have to do? Let's get the clothing. We're going to write an obituary, sign the cremation authorization. So there's a lot of people that I like to call in business mode. And it's fun how the arrangement goes through. By the end of the arrangement, when you're able to ask questions, it kind of brings out that vulnerability that people have that I don't think that you would see in a mortgage loan meeting of some sort. So it is a gift in that it's a universal experience, meaning that we all can understand how grief touches us, and that grief opens us to compassion, and it opens us to vulnerability. And that pulls me back to the Pollyanna of being able to see the beauty in being with somebody like that. And the beauty of that is that this business mode, they're also continuing to care for their loved one. And so that can be beautiful to experience, from the way the picture is set to the way they're dressed. So that's a wonderful thing to be a witness to, is to watch them go through those steps.
And when you were talking to us at the subject matter expert panel, and you mentioned the Death Cafe model, and I was unaware of it, and I would just love for you to share with others, what are Death Cafes and how can they be helpful?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for asking. I love to talk about this. And so the Death Cafe is an international program. It's not something that we developed here. It is an international program that anybody can access. There's a website you can go to, the deathcafe.com, that has a directory. And I just checked it this morning, and I just saw one from Russia, one from Poland. So it is an international program. Hopefully there is one nearby you if that's something that you're interested in. It was developed by John Underwood and Sue Barsky-Reed, based on the ideas of a paper from Bernard Krataz. They started this in London in 2011, and it has grown in popularity as a safe community, a safe space for people to sit together in community and talk about things that have to do with death and dying. The reason I was interested in it is being new to the industry, not having grown up in it, I would sit with families and arrangements, and I couldn't understand the fact that people had no idea what arrangements they wanted or what their mom or dad wanted. They had never had these discussions. And, curious, I wanted to know why people didn't talk about this. Now that I'm, 10 years in, I understand a lot of the reasons why people don't want to talk about their arrangements, their past histories, or their past fears. But so that gave me a place to learn more about what people are thinking. It's basically an open table community discussion where you talk about all things that have to do with death and dying. The moderator should not have a planned topic of the day, like today's green burial. So it shouldn't be like that. It should be all community based on what they want to talk about. And some of the different topics that people have talked about is how to write an obituary. And they'll talk amongst, different ideas of how to come up with an obituary, how to support a friend who is grieving. Their different ideas for what they think happens after you die. So those can be some fun discussions, and it's not gloom and doom. It is not sitting around and talking about hard things. It can be lighthearted, and it can be, it can be fun. It can be light. So just because of the name of it, I don't want people to steer away from it. And I think it's just so important for us to have these discussions. We really know that, we all know that we are going to die someday, but to actually meditate on that and think about the meaning of death gives more meaning to life. The fact that we know that eventually we're going to die, I think, and I have seen, helps us live fuller lives. It reminds us that the short time that we are here on this plane, and to bring us more into the present. Helps us cultivate and contemplate how we want to live our lives, and it brings that into focus. And it's also a safe place. I've had people come in and say, I want to talk about this with my community, and nobody wants to talk about it. Hopefully they're changing their friends' views on this after coming to one, but it is a place that when you leave, you feel really uplifted to talk about this. And I think the most important thing for me as a funeral director, how I see the benefit of it, is when we don't think and we don't talk about our death or what we want for our death, we're robbed of the preparation that I think is really important. From as we talked about with Brenda, you know, deciding what you want. Do you want to be in a hospital if you have that option? Do you want to be at home on hospice? Who do you want with you? What music do you want playing? What do you want done with your body? What kind of service do you want? A lot of people don't know that if you have that time to plan, you can reach out to a funeral home. And if helping dress your mother or tie your father's tie is something that is meaningful to you, that planning is important to make sure that you find a funeral home that will help support you in your choices. And maybe you want to do your sister's nails at her funeral for her preparations. So, you know, thinking about this, talking about this helps people have their wishes met. And I can't see anything more important than living fuller lives by remembering that we're going to die. That's why this job is such a gift, because every day I'm reminded of the preciousness of life. And I go home and I hug my kids a little bit tighter and I call my mom, and I feel like it has brought so much of a gift to be a witness to all of this.
Thank you. Yeah, that is exactly what I was thinking about. Like, it's just, I jotted down, thinking about death changes how you live, right? And and that is on both sides of that, right? If you're thinking about preparing for your own death, but also thinking about after someone has died. And the point of this and this webinar and this work that we're doing is that as we are thinking about how we live, that we see that beauty and we see a newfound perspective on life, and it will be a different one. It's not going to be the same one, whether or not you know, someone has passed away. It's just about seeing the new perspective and learning to live with the loss in its own way. So thank you so much for talking about death cafes. I've learned so much about them, and also just starting to think about, you know, myself and how to make sure I'm having these thoughts. And I know personally of friends who have, you know, I've seen when people have not prepared, the impact it can have on how one dies. And it can be difficult for not only that person, but the people that are supporting them as well. And so I just thank you for all the work that you do on the multiple angles of this perspective. And next, we are going to round this out with Dr. Ottilia Hunter. As she has mentioned, she has worn and does wear multiple hats. And as we'll think about leaning into the December 6th webinar that will focus on you know, what to do with wounds that don't heal, right? That when grief can be a challenge that is not something that you're able to have that cider or look at the leaves in a positive way, but still see that challenge or not listen to that music. That there are times when a clinician can be helpful in supporting that work. And also, we talked about cultural elements of grief, but also faith-based, religious, spiritual, or other beliefs that are related to death and how that impacts how one experiences a loss. So I just wanted to ask you, what role do you see religion, faith, spirituality, beliefs in this?
I think it's important to understand that spirituality is very different than religion. Religion is like a prescribed, you know, method that people like practice. In writing and doing research, you know, spirituality for some is just understanding that there's a higher power. Or I had someone tell me one time, you know, I walked down the street and I know that, you know, man couldn't have created the leaves and the trees and things like that. So, you know, when we think about spirituality, what we know for sure through studies is that it's a great coping mechanism, especially during this time, even as Brenda was sharing about, you know, the different, you know, areas that she's worked in, whether it's, you know, with tribes or, you know, in the community, when you think about where somebody is and you have a respect for where they are spiritually, it's being able to assist them, however that is, to be able to move from the loss of somebody. And we do talk about having a good death, right? And to where their family is actually respecting, their wishes and things like that. And even in a religious, in the hat that I wear as a clergy, I think about Heather, like I'm with them, I'm with the families when they're in hospice, and I'm with them, sitting at the bedside, and then being able to be with them when you're walking into the funeral home with them, and you want to just be there for moral support, to be able to help them make some of the choices, and to be able to trust somebody like Heather who's sitting in front of them to help them make some of the decisions that need to be made while respecting the wishes of their loved ones. But the thing that we absolutely know, spirituality is very much like culture. It can be different for everybody. But being able to respect that with the people who you are engaging with is really important. I think when we move from the clerical perspective into the clinical side, I think what's important is understanding that work. And not all clinicians specialize in grief. And so you have to, one of the big things is going to be to decide whether or not you have a clinician that actually specializes in grief. If you come in and that's not something that they do, I would highly recommend that you find somebody who's very comfortable with this. I have friends, and I think about the group of people that I graduated with for my PhD, and none of them did grief. And they all would say things like, I can't believe you do this. Like, how can you? And I think it comes from a place of experiencing loss and being comfortable with that. And I don't know if we'll ever be okay with it, but I think you have to come to a place where, and I love Heather's position, it helps you appreciate life. And I think that came from both my grandmothers, who had just a very different perspective of grief. It didn't change anything when I lost my oldest sister, because I was sad that she passed away, and right, to about different timelines. I lost my dad a year ago, and it's still hard for you when you're the one going through it. But when you know that this is, you're gonna experience this, it's as one of my grandmothers used to say, it's the debt we all have to pay, right? And so, which I saw kind of on Heather's, some of the things on Heather's slide that she had for the Deaf Cafe. So when you think about it in terms of the spirituality portion, we absolutely know that it's a coping mechanism, and it helps people to be able to process through it. Not that they want to process through it, but we do know that it can be something that can help them.
And I have a question. When you, as you see people sometimes as clergy, at what point do you say, I really think you should see a clinician?
It's different for me because I am a clinician.
Oh, yeah, but yeah, if you weren't, say, they're
Yeah.
clinician, yeah.
So I get referrals from a lot of people, a lot of clergy. And really it comes at the place where they don't feel like they can handle it. It's when somebody has some unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? So they're drinking too much, or they've isolated too much, or they've crossed the line from what we would think of in terms of the DSM for grief and into like depression or anxiety or things like that. People who have a previous mental health diagnosis, are people who, you want to be really careful with, because those are ones who could easily end up in a place that's not healthy for them, or somebody who had a previous, substance use disorder diagnosis, being able to say, this is a time where you want to gird yourself up and make sure you really have the help that you need. And I think that the thing as a clinician that becomes really important is no two people grieve alike. But helping people understand that where they are is, helping them find their new norms is really important. So, I think that is when you really want to make sure that you're doing the referral. That unresolved anger, when they're just mad all the time, which we saw, in our word cloud, is also a time where we want to be able to kind of point somebody in the direction of a behavioral health specialist. So I think that those become really like the key things to look for, or anything that's just kind of not part of that person's norm. Understanding that they've had a recent loss. I've had people to come see me and I'm trying to figure out where some things came from, and I finally hit on it, right? I'm like, has there been a recent loss? Well, about 4 months ago, and then you find out that there was, and then now everything makes sense. So being able to have that time, and even talking about Joyelle's, some of the stuff that she talks about, as a clinician, I've had people who they didn't get the bereavement time that they needed, and being able to say, you need some time, and being with a clinician that can say, you need to be out for a while, and you need to be able to do the things that you need to do to be able to really grieve properly and get through what you need to get through. Sometimes it's necessary as a clinician to be able to see that and give people the space that they need, and be able to assist them through whatever paperwork and things that they need to do for their jobs, or whatever else they have going on in their life. But being able to see somebody who is familiar with grief and knows what that looks like is super, super important. And allowing them to help, walk people through their grief and into finding what we call a new normal. And life will never be the same again, after your loss. But what does it look like now? And that's not to say that you'll never smile again and you'll never be happy again. It's to say that you have to find out what that looks like for you. But there are definitely some unhealthy coping mechanisms, and we don't want people going down those avenues.
Thank you so much for that. I think about, religion and spirituality, that it can often be, and there's a lot of literature around it being a healthy coping mechanism for so many. And then for many as well, just like any other relationship, sometimes it can be a challenging spot where you can be angry at God, and that can be another stressor or trigger for not being able to healthfully process this time and this loss. And so I definitely appreciate just thinking about how does this fit in, and also your point around that not everyone specializes, right? Not everyone specializes, and just like any other clinical service, the most important part of it is connecting with that other individual and finding someone that you feel like meets their needs, and your needs, and sometimes it may be a little bit of a process. And if someone is having thoughts of not wanting to live or wanting to join their loved one and do things to join their loved one, or doing things that are risky or unhealthy, if they lost that much hope, then I think it is really important to see someone, or just not be able to find that normal in a way that they're able to hit the new stride. And obviously it'll take some time, but if it's not coming, then it's important to get some professional help too. So thank you so much for all of those perspectives. We're running a little bit out of time. I want to go around the room with round robin for everyone. Say one thing that you could tell someone who's coping with grief right now. I'm going to start. Think about a new tradition. My grandmother passed away during Christmas time many years ago, a couple days before Christmas. That year we said, we don't feel like cooking, we are making spaghetti. Every year since then, we have made spaghetti or lasagna or something Italian, just as sort of in her honor, and that's made it a new tradition. And so that's one thing. Another, Brenda, one thing you would tell someone that's coping right now.
Oh, kindness to yourself. Give yourself some grace.
Heather? What's your
Finding support.
Sorry, what was that?
Finding support.
Finding support. Tara?
I think mine is similar to yours, Belina. Just to stay curious about what can help you and your child. If you're grieving with a child, stay curious about new things to try to cope or express your big feelings, and to find new opportunities to connect and find hope in the future.
Thank you. And don't go, because we do have a little a questionnaire for future references too, if you have a couple more minutes. Joyelle?
I would just say set boundaries for yourself around things that don't feel right and give yourself that kindness that Brenda and Heather mentioned earlier to walk away and protect yourself.
Thank you. Otilia?
I would say connection. I think somebody mentioned it already, but absolutely finding connection. I love the Death Cafe, but finding a group of people who understand and can stand with you.
And did I miss anyone? No, okay, that sounds good. As I started clicking and screen started moving. Olivia, can you take it home with just a reminder about what we have available next? And I wanted to thank also this like I said, that I might be an anchor of a multiple different groups, individuals, people that are moving this motor, as well as all the subject matter experts that helped us in June. Next slide.
Yes, thank you all for being here today. We've been doing a lot at SAMHSA to prepare for this week, and as mentioned throughout the webinar, we have a second one on December 6th, what to do with the wounds that time does not heal. You can register for that webinar at that first QR code, and then in addition to these webinars, we have also uploaded a blog today talking about grief and helping to raise awareness of this week. A new webpage called Coping with Bereavement and Grief that will be available at all times for all individuals that are experiencing grief, and a social media toolkit that has graphics that you all can share throughout this week. You can find those 3 resources at those other QR codes,
Including these really cool virtual backgrounds. All right, we have a survey for you because, like we said, we're rooting and growing. So we would love to hear what next. We'll have this other webinar as well, but what else would you like to hear? As Otilia said, a lot of clinicians aren't really trained in this space. I know I didn't get specialized training. So I think that if you're a clinician, do you want that? How else can we help you and support this work at SAMHSA? So click on the QR code and please give us feedback about what else we can do. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon and spending your time with us. I know that this is a challenging season for many. It's also a time where people are very busy, so we do not take your time for granted. Feel free as well to send us feedback about this webinar. We do plan on uploading this webinar as well, and we will be posting it on the website, and we can we'll be able to try to see if we can find some other ways to answer your questions as well. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.